University of Illinois Extension's Community and Economic Development Program, in partnership with the Illinois Association of County Board Members and Commissioners, is very pleased to once again bring you this annual update with the special guests of the National Association of Counties. As we get our presentation ready for the first speaker, let me introduce him to you. He's from the National Association of Counties. His name is Michael Bellarmino. I probably just butchered his name. I apologize. I'll let him say that again for you. But Michael serves as the Associate Legislative Director for Finance and Intergovernmental Affairs, where he is responsible for all policy development and lobbying for the association in the areas of municipal finance and tax, elections, pensions, and county and tribal government relationships. Michael also serves as Associate General Counsel for NACO. Michael first joined NACO in November of 2008 as an intern in the Legislative Affairs Department, where he assisted staff on health policy. At the beginning of 2010, Michael then spent 6 months as a research associate in NACO's research department before becoming the Associate Legislative Director for Finance and Intergovernmental Affairs. In January of 2013, Michael also began serving as Associate General Counsel for NACO. Michael received his BBA in Computer Information Systems from Georgia State University and his JD MBA from Western New England University. We're in very good hands this morning, so we want to thank you for joining us, Michael, and we'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today and allowing me to speak to you. I'm going to talk a little bit about our legislative update as far as what we're watching here at the federal level and some of the priorities that we're focused on, especially as we get into the new year. How I'm going to do that today is I'm going to start off by briefly talking about the recent elections, because that really creates the best framework in which to think about next year, especially when you're thinking about the priorities and the dynamics of how Congress is going to work and if they're actually going to get anything done. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been focused on for counties during the lame duck session. As you may know, the lame duck is that short period between the November elections and right up until whenever Congress decides that they want to gavel out for the end of the year. And then I'll wrap up my presentation by talking about county priorities for the next year, and it's really safe to say at this point that our work is going to be cut out for us. So right now you see the Why Counties Matter slide, and that's actually something that we have really been honing in on for the past 2 years now, because it's really been an education process when it comes to the federal legislators as well as members and officials in the administration, because a lot of them really just don't have a basic understanding of what all counties do. And as you see, we've been titling it Why Counties Matter, but eventually we're just going to drop the why and just have it as Counties Matter, just to make sure that we continue to educate folks in and around D.C. about the importance and all the roles that county government serves. Now, jumping right into the 2014 midterm elections, just a couple of quick data points that we wanted to point out. For one, this was actually the lowest voter turnout in almost 72 years, with only about 36.4% of the voting eligible population casting ballots. Now, this actually does continue a steady decline in midterm voter participation, which generally is not unexpected in a midterm election. You're always going to get higher participation during a presidential election, but I'm not sure any of us really saw that this was going to be the lowest turnout. The last time voter turnout was as low as this was during a midterm cycle in 1942, when only 33.9% of eligible voters cast votes. And now you should see a slide that talks about the amount of money that actually went into the campaigns, which approached $4 billion, when we can only expect that to potentially go a little higher as we get into the presidential election, which is, it's 2016, but that's literally right around the corner as far as when you start thinking those campaigns are going to begin. I want to talk a little bit about some of the results. As you may know, as recently as this weekend, the runoff election for one of the Senate seats in Louisiana was finally decided. So now the Republicans actually have a 54-seat majority in the Senate. This, of course, was not entirely unexpected as we approached the weeks getting to the election, because a lot of the polls were showing that the Republicans were likely going to take over the Senate. However, one quick thing to note is that while they do have a 54-seat majority, they're not necessarily past that filibuster-proof threshold, which you need 60 votes in the Senate in order to overcome a filibuster, which the Democrats at this point would be able to make use of. However, we'll see as the next Congress comes into session when we get into January, if there's even going to be any kind of attempt to change that rule. Next, of course, in the House, the Republicans maintain the majority. They did gain a few more seats as well. There are still a few, I believe there are still a few races that are undecided that we'll probably know a little more about in the coming weeks. So right now they're sitting with about 244-seat majority. And then, of course, from the state level, from our friends over at the Washington Post, they took a look at the governorships. There were quite a few of them that were up for election this year, and 31 now are controlled by Republican governors. And then at the state legislature level, you have about 300 seats that were gained, with over 4,100 of the nation's 7,300 state legislature seats now going to Republican members. Now, what's important about all this, especially when we take a step back and look at the trends in the midterm elections, is especially in Congress, you're talking about 61 new members that are going to be seated in the upcoming session. And then since 2010, you've had about 45 members who have joined the Senate, while more than 200 have joined the House. And what all this really means is, as we get into the 114th Congress, it's going to be an education process again. You saw me reference the Why Counties Matter slide earlier, but we're going to have to restart that process all over again to make sure that all of these members really understand what it is that county governments do, and how all the different legislative initiatives and even the federal spending process, how that all impacts local government. So of course, again, we've got our work cut out for us, and that's one of the things that we always try to encourage, counties, especially county officials, is to just make sure that you're constantly engaging with your congressional delegation, and just always reminding them, what is it that you're doing, and how important it is to have that federal, state, and local cooperation that should be happening to try to address a lot of the critical needs. And I just invite you to go to www.naco.org to take a look at an election analysis that we did and released a few weeks ago. So with that, I'm going to get right into the meat of what we really want to talk about here, and that's that legislative update. The lame duck session, it's kind of, I have up here, it's not so lame, but it's been kind of an up and down few weeks here in Congress as they, tried to process the election results, and then try to figure out what they can really do, or what they really want to do, before the end of the 113th Congress. I'm going to take this in a slightly reverse order and talk first about the FY 2015 appropriations. As some of you may know, we're currently on a continuing resolution that funds the federal government up until later this week, December 11th. And they did this, of course, right before they adjourned for the August recess, because the budget process was never completed, which generally starts right around February when the President releases his budget. Then the House and Senate appropriators do their thing. And ideally, you want to have a budget passed by mid to late spring. But that actually hasn't happened in a few years now, and we've pretty much been operating on a continuing resolution. And so right now the current continuing resolution expires, like I said, on December 11th. And there are negotiations going on right now to try to figure out how do we want to get this into the next year, as we approach the end of our session. So up until Monday, the belief was they were going to be able to put some language out by midday yesterday, and both the House and the Senate would have been able to act on it before the deadline. Unfortunately, there are a couple of issues that have created some hiccups. So one of them being the terrorism risk insurance bill. I think that was one of the sticking points, as well as some other, I guess, pension funding issues and some other matters that dealt with the President's recent executive order on immigration. That has kind of slowed the process down just a little bit, so we probably may expect just a short-term extension of a matter of a few days in order to buy them more time to negotiate whatever that final package is going to look like. I want to go into waters of the U.S. That's been something that NACO has been focused on for the almost past year now, and really in the lame duck session, trying to figure out how to, if we are going to move forward on this. The Waters of the U.S. is a proposed rule that on April 21st of this year, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers jointly released, which would have amended the definition of waters of the U.S. and expand the range of waters that fall under federal jurisdiction. Now, where this creates some heartburn for local government is because a lot of the work that local governments have to do to maintain and even develop some of the roadside ditches and whatnot, and some of the local waterways may end up becoming, falling under greater jurisdiction, which would, make the permitting process longer and potentially hamper some of the project timelines. So it definitely would impact a lot of those county-owned and maintained roadside ditches and flood control channels. And they had the rule open for public comment. It closed on November 14th. We were told that over 500,000 comments were filed. We are hearing that comments are still being filed at this point, but we don't know if the EPA will consider those comments that have come in after the deadline. We're also hearing that the EPA hopes to have a final rule out in late spring of 2015. But we're also aware that, as I mentioned, the negotiations and discussions that are revolving around the appropriations process, one of the other things that we hear is going on as far as the discussion is potentially trying to find or get some language in that would prevent the EPA from expending any appropriated dollars to implement this rule. So that potentially could be another sticking point as well, although we're not actually sure if that's actually confirmed or not. Next is the Payment in Lieu of Taxes program and the Secure Rural Schools program, which we like to call PILT and SRS for short. Now, the PILT program is especially important for counties, as counties are really the only government entities that actually do receive this funding. It was a program that was created in 1976 to offset the costs incurred by counties for services provided to federal employees and families, the public, and to the users of public lands. Now, this program unfortunately has become more and more subject to the federal appropriations process, which, as I referenced earlier, has been more and more uncertain as we've gone through the past couple of years. So the last time that this program was funded was through the Farm Bill that passed last year, but it only funded it for 1 year, which was the fiscal year 2014. And right now we're trying to just find a path forward for funding for FY 2015, although that still has yet to be determined. The ultimate goal is to be able to find just permanent funding where we don't have to continue to come back to the appropriations process for this money that is really critical to those counties that receive it. And we're talking about counties in some instances that have up to 98% of their county land as actual public land, so they can't tax it. Now, Illinois does have a number of counties that does receive some of the PILT funding, although I don't think there's a county, or I'm not exactly sure that there's a county that has, that 98% characteristic, as most of those are in the West. And then finally, one of the other issues that we've been focused on in the lame duck session has been the Marketplace Fairness Act. Some of you may be aware of this, as Senator Durbin has been one of our, I guess, one of the greater champions that we've been working with on this issue, and he's been working in a bipartisan way, working with Senators Enzi from Wyoming and Alexander from Tennessee, to try to move this legislation forward. And what this essentially would do would grant state and local governments with the ability to enforce already existing sales taxes on remote sales. Now, this issue was really something that started back in the mail order catalog days and has only been compounded recently with the explosive growth of the internet. Now, we also thought this was another one of those issues that was going to be able to move in the lame duck session. We had an event last week with a lot of the state and local government organizations, as well as some retail groups, asking Congress to act on it before the end of the year. But as I noted, with the challenges that they're having just with the appropriations process, it looks like that window is slowly closing for us to be able to move this year. Now, the outlook for the 114th Congress as we get into next year, right after the elections, House Speaker John Boehner and the soon-to-be Majority Leader Mitch McConnell actually released some of their priorities that they were hoping to address as they get into the 114th Congress. You'll see the list on the screen. Hopefully you see the list on the screen. So it's just a number of things that we know that the Republicans have tried to address and tackle. We've seen it in the House more so only because the Republicans have had the majority in the House. So we can certainly expect to see some issues like the Keystone Pipeline, as well as other measures that would look to try to impact the Affordable Care Act in some way, as well as initiatives that will try to address some of the regulations that you currently see the Obama administration trying to enforce and implement, simply because they haven't had the ability to do so through Congress. Now, as we get into the 114th Congress, NACO will continue to monitor some of those important issues to counties, one of them being, of course, tax reform. That's going to be a multi-year process, and most particularly for state and local governments are those provisions like the tax exemption for municipal bond interest. And municipal bonds, as many of you may know, are one of the critical funding tools for state and local governments to be able to fund those infrastructure projects, whether it's a road or a bridge or a water treatment system. And of course, entitlement reform with the role that counties play in many states as a provider. And then immigration reform, where there is an impact for counties, especially when it comes to the human services arena. However, we know in the Senate they did pass some immigration reform bills in this current session. The House actually took more of a piecemeal approach. How that's going to look now that the Republicans are going to have control of both chambers, we're not sure if it's going to be a piecemeal or overall comprehensive approach. And then finally, transportation reauthorization, and that has been a huge priority for NACO, because counties, they own and maintain over 45% of the nation's roads and highways. So of course, having that funding stream is something that's really important for us to understand and have some certainty on. So the current Highway Trust Fund is at least a patch that they passed earlier this year, is going to keep the trust fund, I guess, solvent is the best way to put it at this point, up until May 31st of next year. Unfortunately, there has not been a long-term funding solution figured out yet, and of course, you're going to throw in a couple of different things, like whether it's increasing the gas tax or finding some other way to generate that revenue to make sure that the Highway Trust Fund is no longer insolvent. Will certainly continue to come up. And then I'm just going to kind of fly through some of these only because you'll have this as far as the presentation after, but just a couple of key dates that you want to look out for. Really, Congress will come in, and then late January we'll understand more about the agenda of the Obama administration, especially facing this new Republican-controlled Congress, and you'll probably hear a lot of comments about trying to work together and reach across the aisle. And then, of course, February 2nd is right around when we're supposed to kick off that next cycle of the budget process, because we've got to get to FY 2016 now as far as the funding goes. But whether that budget from the Obama administration is going to be on time, that'll remains to be determined. And then early spring, of course, we're talking about the debt ceiling again, how Congress is planning to address that. That's another one of those issues that's kind of lying out there, but given the priorities that the Speaker and the Majority Leader have identified, we're not sure how they plan to tackle this one yet. And then, of course, I've already mentioned the Highway Trust Fund. That's certainly something that we'll continue to engage Congress on to make sure that that we don't run afoul or leave counties without a way to try to fund all of these important projects. And then finally, I'll just go ahead and close out. You'll see a lot of the NACO policy priorities are things that I've already mentioned, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. And then I'm just going to jump right into the last screen, which is our contact information as far as the legislative department staff. Again, this will be part of the presentation, a copy of the presentation that you have, and please feel free to reach out to us with any questions that you may have.
So now we're going to turn it over to Taylor after I give you a brief bio on him, and he will talk about from the state perspective. Taylor K. Anderson, contractual consult from ALC, joined Anderson Legislative Consulting in 2007. Following his completion of a Dunn Fellowship in the Legislative Office of the Governor. There he helped design and authored the bill tracking training website for state agency liaisons, as well as worked closely with top state agency heads and members of the Illinois State Senate. Prior to his fellowship, Taylor began his legislative training by serving as an intern for various state entities and associations. Taylor also worked with the Illinois Chamber of Commerce Government Affairs Division, where he analyzed voter precincts and researched, authored, and chamber position papers. He also served as assistant to Deputy Director to Physical Services for Secretary of State Jesse White.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to talk a little bit about the spring session and some of the bills that were passed during this last and final year of the 98th General Assembly, and then we'll spend just a couple moments talking about a few bills that were passed during this veto session and what we can expect moving forward for the spring session of 2015. So with that said, this spring session was the second and final year of the 98th General Assembly, and they did adjourn on time on May 31st, as they were constitutionally obligated to do. They passed several bills that affect counties. We've got quite a list, and I won't talk about all of them because I do want to get you out of here at 1, but we will talk about some of the more pertinent bills and some of those that are maybe less self-explanatory than others. With that said, we'll begin with Senate Bill 2829. And what this bill originally sought to do was make a change in how the administrative review process worked. This piece of legislation was brought forward by the Illinois Rental Property Owners Association. They had several concerns, some of them maybe more founded than others, with regards to erroneous cases being brought against rental property owners. What this original language sought to do was to penalize local governments if it was determined by a judge that the plaintiff was maybe erroneously brought to claim or through the administrative review process. And what that would have ended up doing is costing counties a ton of money to defend themselves for filing administrative review cases. And so what we were able to do in the House, this bill passed the Senate as is, but in the House we were able to amend the bill to apply only to municipalities, and then to provide some recourses for municipalities in the case that they were brought to court and the judge found for the municipality they would be able to go back and to recoup costs against the plaintiff. Likewise, if the plaintiff was awarded an erroneous decision by the judge, they would be able to seek damages against the municipality. So should this law be sought to extend it to counties in the future, there would be some precedent for the counties to be able to recoup their losses likewise as the plaintiff would be able to do. So I think overall we were able to make a bad bill slightly less bad, and sometimes in the General Assembly that in and of itself is a win. The next bill is Senate Bill 2937. This bill would prohibit law enforcement agencies from using private or third-party drones to acquire information. Obviously, the technology, drone technology, has seen a sharp increase in the past few years, and certainly it's diversified from a strictly military application to now commercial and even recreational usage. So we're starting to see more legislation dealing with drones, and this one would prohibit law enforcement agencies from gathering information. I know that there was a couple of issues with regards to when this information could or if it could be acquired. They do make some provisions for there not needing to be a search warrant if the information collected is to be used to identify the scope or size, or if there's a disaster or public health emergency, which I think is reasonable and understandable. Considering that gathering that type of information may be able to be quickly done with the use of a drone, and may actually produce cost savings to a county rather than sending out a number of EMT units to try to assess the situation. You may be able to use or gather information from drones or drones operated by a third party. The next bill is Senate Bill 3287, and this bill was an expansion of the workers' compensation system. Before this bill became law, a third party or outside safety consultant organization could come in and make suggestions or use their expertise to guide an entity with regards to safety regulations and what might be more safe and what changes may increase safety with regards to workers' compensation. Before that, outside third party was prohibited from being brought into a workers' compensation claim. With the change to this law, that outside organization or third party would now be subject to suit if a claim was filed against them. Now, this is somewhat troublesome for a number of different reasons. I know that there are county organizations and other local government entities that use safety consultants for various applications with regards to workers' compensation. This also can be troublesome if the county or another unit of local government itself sometimes acts as a safety service. So this just brings more opaqueness to the workers' compensation system, in my opinion. In 2010, we were able to pass some workers' compensation reform. I believe more reform is needed. I hear from counties all the time of the different abuses of the workers' compensation system. Unfortunately, this bill was kind of a step back with regards to how that system operates. Illinois is still ranked, I believe, in the top 10 most expensive worker compensation systems in the country. I believe we're actually in the top 5. At one point in time, we were in the top 2 or 3. So while we were able to make some gains recently in 2010, this does appear to be kind of a step backwards. Next is Senate Bill 3411. This bill has been named kind of the quota bill, and what this would do is prohibit counties, municipalities from requiring police officers to meet any type of ticket quota, and really more troubling, it would prevent quotas from being used in the course of evaluation of an officer's performance. This applies to all levels of law enforcement in the state, so local, county, and state police officers. And really what we've heard from kind of those entities and the sheriff's department is it's going to be very difficult for the sergeants now to look at 2 officers who were maybe patrolling the same stretch of highway or maybe patrolling the same area during similar times, is to be able to compare those 2 officers to one another with regards to the level of their performance. Obviously, there is kind of a misconception among the populace at large that, you know, they're more apt to get or receive a ticket at the end of the month because an officer is trying to meet their quota, when obviously what quotas are probably most often used for is to evaluate an officer. So that tool has been taken away. There may still be some movement for evaluating and using quotas to do so. However, the way this bill is written makes it very, very difficult moving forward for management to evaluate the performance of their law enforcement officers. The next bill is Senate Bill 3312, and this bill is fairly simple. It essentially makes some definitional changes, but really removes poker runs from the Charitable Gains Act, which is regulated by the state, and moves them into the Raffle Act section, which is regulated by the counties. So now each county is authorized to establish a system for licensing of poker runs, adopting key locations, and imposing a fee which is not to exceed $25 for the poker runs license. So really this is taking poker runs, which usually are locally charitable activities, and moving them to the local level, and instead of having those charity groups or nonprofit organizations have to work through the state system. Now they can do it at the local level at their county. So this bill expands county authority, and I believe makes a proper switch for really what is mostly used as kind of a local charity operation. Moving to House bills, our first bill is, in my opinion, perhaps one of the best bills to come out of the spring session if you are a county or a municipality or receive LGDF, and this is the LGDF Prompt Payment Bill, which was sponsored by Representative Anthony DeLuca from Chicago Heights. This was the second or third year, I believe, he's introduced this piece of legislation, and it took 3 years for it ultimately to be passed and signed into law. Essentially what this bill does is it places a 60-day limit on funds being moved from the General Revenue Fund to the Local Government Distributed Fund. If you remember, as far back as, or as recent as a couple years ago, and as far back as maybe 5 LGDF payments to units of local government was creeping up into the teens as far as months were concerned, with the state being late to make those payments. I know at one point in time, several counties mentioned they were 9 or 10 months behind in receiving their LGDF payment from the state. So now what this does is it gives the Illinois Comptroller 60 days, and then that money has to be moved from the JRF to the local government distributed fund. What we were finding is that the state comptroller was using all of the GRF to pay the state's bills and then forgetting to place any money in the local government distributed fund. And they were doing that month after month after month, and the months were racking up. And as I said, the state was getting 9, 10, 11 months behind. So now this kind of places a cap on 2 months. The state cannot be more than 2 months behind in making those LGDF payments, and we know how essential LGDF funds are to units of local government, particularly the counties, and so this will certainly expedite the tax disbursement to you. House Bill 4208 was a trailer bill to a bill that was passed last spring. This bill and the bill that was passed last spring provides a mechanism for appointed people or persons to be removed, and provides ethic laws for people appointed by the county to serve on certain boards or certain functions. That first bill that was passed, there was a loophole, and so it only made a reference to persons that were appointed by the entirety of the county board, neglecting those appointees that could be appointed by an individual member or a chairperson of a county board. So now this ethics law in removal applies to all appointees, whether they be appointed by the entire county board, by a subcommittee of a county board, or by an individual or chairperson. So it just simply closes the loophole. We'll skip down to, House Bill 5503. If you remember from last year, one of the hot topics or hot buzzwords was transparency. There were several bills dealing with transparency, and these next two bills kind of continue that trend, making or striving to make local governments and local information more accessible. So this says each fiscal year, within 60 days of an audit of county funds, the auditor conducting the audit is required to provide copies of any management letter or financial statements to each member of the county board. This also is the genesis is kind of dealing with what happened, if you remember, in the suburbs, where the financial auditor was able to, over a period of 15 to 20 years, steal upwards of $50 million from the municipality or village. And so what this is hoping to do is place the information of the financial audit into the individual county board members' hands, and also make it available via website if the county maintains a website. Again, this is about providing more information, more transparency, and hopefully preventing any of anything like we saw a couple of years ago happening again, because if I remember correctly, one of the instances in that situation was the municipal financial officer, who was the culprit, refused or did not share the information that they received from the auditor, and so they were able to manipulate the system by essentially hiding or changing the information. The next bill is House Bill 5623. This bill underwent several amendments before we were able to amend it to this level, but it requires that each unit of local government which maintains a website to post an email address so members of the public can send email questions to the unit of local government. This was originally going to require that each county board member have a separate email address that be posted so that their constituents or members of the public or whomever could email them directly. We found that, or we thought that was going to be quite burdensome for county board members. We know that some county board members, it obviously is not a full-time job for them. They have other jobs. Many, need to be in the field running combines, and so, to have them maintain, an email address that they had to check and respond to, and that was foilable, just seemed to be too much burden. So now it requires that the unit of local government have an email address and maintain that. So again, I think we were able to reach a compromise with the bill, but obviously the idea of transparency, allowing people to communicate and to have a response from their unit of local government is kind of the way we're headed and where we're going. And I don't necessarily think that's bad as long as it's reasonable and doesn't place extremely undue burdens upon people who are elected to serve on behalf of their constituents. Veto session adjourned on December 4th. There was only 6 days, there were only 5 days of veto session this year, and in those 5 days, the House and Senate were able to pass some very controversial bills, some of them affecting counties, and I'm going to only talk about one of them, and that is Senate Bill 3075. What this bill does, and it was passed and is likely to be signed by the governor's office, is to increase the pay from jurors from its current minimum of $4 to $10 to a $25 minimum for the first day and then $50 for each subsequent day. We've talked to some counties, and I've talked to some counties about what kind of cost increase they'd be looking at, and they ran the numbers for what it looked like in 2013, and if those 2013 numbers held, they're looking at anywhere between, and it depends on what the county is currently paying and how often they have these cases, but we've heard anywhere from $150,000 increase to a $350,000 increase annually. So this bill is going to be a heavy unfunded mandate on many counties. I will say that this bill also does provide that for civil cases, there only needs to be 6 jurors instead of 12, and so it lessens the number of jurors that are going to be needed during civil cases. But I also will say that, from my understanding, the vast majority of cases heard through the courts in a county are usually criminal. So I don't know if there's any cost savings that are going to be seen there, reducing civil cases 12 down to 6. This also eliminates any travel reimbursement. I know some counties have travel reimbursement rates for jurors. This eliminates that, but again, it does increase the juror reimbursement to $25 for the first day to $50 each day thereafter, and so we know that's going to be a huge increase for many counties. As I said, there were several bills. Real quickly, I just want to talk about House Bill 3796. This bill was the luminous requester bill. As you know, there's been several changes to the Freedom of Information Act since it was first enacted in 2010, or excuse me, 2009. And this one deals with voluminous requesters and the amount of time and energy and money that units of local government were having to face dealing with these voluminous requesters. And so this puts some reasonable constraints on voluminous requesters. So if you, for instance, have a requester who is made a request and it is over, I believe, 500 pages, that would qualify as a voluminous requester. If someone makes more than 5 requests in one day, that is also considered a voluminous request. So I believe this is going to have some very positive repercussions for counties and units of local government, and I believe in no way will this impede upon people's ability to use FOIA or for local government to be transparent. It merely places some reasonable constraints because there were many situations where, because of a voluminous request, counties and municipalities were slow to respond to more reasonable FOIA requests. So I believe this law will be very helpful. It was vetoed by the governor in this past veto session. Both the House and the Senate concurred to override the governor's veto, and so it now will become law. Real quick, because I know Amy wants to have some time for questions, is what's next for the spring of 2015, and it's going to be the budget showdown. It's going to be very interesting this year, considering we have a new governor coming in, a governor of a different party than the majorities in the House and the Senate. We're looking at anywhere between a $3 to $5 billion shortfall now that the income tax increase is going to sunset December 31st. There's going to be, I'm already hearing that several state agencies will not have enough money to finish out the fiscal year, and we're already starting to hear clamorings for maybe passing some type of supplemental budget if they're unable to agree with what to do with regards to either making the income tax increase permanent, reducing it, over a number of years. We've already started to hear Governor-elect Rauner maybe backtrack a little bit from his no tax increase stance, and so it's going to be very interesting to see how Governor-elect Rauner, President Cullerton, and Speaker Madigan kind of collide in what they're able to work out for spring 2015.
Callie asks, for House Bill 3796, recovery of personnel cost is just for commercial requests of FOIA?
That's a very good question. And no, this bill is not just limited to commercial requests. Any requester who is deemed a voluminous requester under the definitions of this act, there would be subject to recovery cost. So great question, and no, it's not limited to just commercial.
We really appreciate our partnership, with the Illinois Association of County Board Members and Commissioners. I know that there are opportunities for elected officials to get involved, and we hope that you do that, because you obviously see all these initiatives and all these bills that are out there and proposals that are out there that are affecting you directly at a local level, whether they're unfunded mandates or these regulations that are affecting you directly. So there are things that you can do to get involved, or events that you can attend. And Kelly Murray, I know she's on the call. Unfortunately, while we're having some issues with technology, I think she did too. She really appreciates that you're able to be here and you were able to participate. And then she also had there is some suggestions that she had and wanted you to know about the tentative meeting coming up on February 19th. that you should look for some additional information, as well as some information on participating in a legislative committee. Appointment forms would be coming out soon to you. And there's another question down here. Yeah.
Yes. Great question.
Yeah.
The rate of the LGDF funding will not go back to 10% immediately. The way it is currently structured, if nothing is done, we are currently at 6%. When the income tax increase goes away, we will go up to, I believe it's 8.25 or just about 8.25, and that will last from 2015 to 2025. In 2025, that LGDF percentage will go up to 9.27 or just about there. So no, we actually don't ever get back up to the 10% we were before the income tax increase. That's one of the things Kelly Murray and I have been working on, as well as other partners that do work for units of local government. It is a concern, and I do think if something is done with the income tax increase in 2015, hopefully there will be an opportunity there to recoup the full 10%.
We are concluded for today's presentation. I thank everybody for joining us. I don't see any more questions, so I hope everybody has a great day.